The reason why I say men are responsible for everything is because we are in the leadership role, and this is a responsibility that God put on men.
And I just remember sitting there listening to him. I was just like, no. And I was even shocked when I said that because I had never said that. And even my dad's like, what? I was like, no. I'm like, I don't want to. I'm like, I like this. And this is, but at the time I was like, but I'm still a lawyer, right? Like I'm still working and da-da-da-da-da. It's just something I'm doing on the side. It's totally fine. Everybody does it. Like trying to lessen the blow. But it was the first time that it's like every fiber of my being is like, you can't do that. Because I think I knew like you have this window, you have this opportunity that you can get out of that 9-to-5 life that you've always
So there you have it, folks. For her, the opportunity to get out of the 9-to-5. And don't forget, look, the social engineers back in the 80s, 70s and 80s worked extremely hard to push the narrative to women who were in the kitchen, who were in the home, to get them out of the home into the workplace.
How do we get to the point where so many young women today think to be free is to go to college, get a great degree, have a fantastic job, and be as sexually free as possible? How did those get joined together? Propaganda isn't just a bunch of lies. People think, oh, propaganda, I can spot it in a minute because it's just a bunch of lies. No, propaganda is a very sophisticated, it's half-truth, selected truth, and truth out of context.
Is used not to sell just products, it's also used to sell ideas.
The feminist movement and the sexual revolution were two radically different movements. The feminist movement was fighting for equal opportunity for women in education and the workforce. The sexual revolution was fighting for all sorts of sexual freedoms. Cosmo, we pretended that this sexual revolution was a freedom for women. It actually was not. It was actually kind of a slavery. But we pretended it was freedom for women. And over time, as the sexual revolution and the women's movement got identified closer and closer together, a lot of women began to buy into that illusion.
Now, can you see how this has gone full circle? You now have this woman here who naturally, going back to her proclivity of not wanting to be in the workplace, but instead wanting to fall into OnlyFans pornography, sex work. I mean, it's quite incredible to see how they're able to pull it off. And without a doubt, again, there are so many different factors, so many different forces at work here that have enabled this. It's not just a straightforward thing. This is very, very complex war against humanity, war against the family, ultimately leading to what I said before, which was a transhuman agenda. For those of you who don't know what that is, I'll be discussing that in forthcoming videos. But just to give you an idea of one of the avenues that has led to this, which was the education system. Candace Owens on her last appearance on the Whatever podcast, gave a very eloquent explanation of exactly how the education system was usurped with regards to certainly sex education to change the mindset of a generation from sort of no sex before marriage to then a much more liberal, promiscuous attitude, which has led the way, opened the pathway to what we have today.
Honestly, this is kind of like a subtle reason also why guys aren't getting married that no one really talks about. Number of women who had 10 plus sexual partners before marriage nearly doubled in the last 30 years per recent survey.
I wonder why.
Premarital sex is more normalized than ever. It's even normalized to have multiple sexual partners before getting married. A recent survey reveals how much more common it is for women to have sex with more than 10 different men before they walk down the aisle. And this came out, again, 2 days ago, April 17, 2023. Scroll down. Women who save their virginity for marriage are mocked in today's culture as weird, strange girls who have no social skills and will make boring wives. Premarital sex is not only considered normal, it's even expected. Every part of society tells us that women should be experimenting sexually before they settle down with their future husband. We see this narrative in TV and movies, on social media, and even in books and magazines. But just a few short decades ago, it was considered normal to either get married as a virgin or only have one premarital sex partner. And that typically would be like a widow or a woman that came from a divorce, etc. Right? A collection of data from the National Survey of Family Growth was gathered from 2002 to 2006 to 2010 and 2011 to 2013. And it reveals that women have racked up more premarital sex partners than ever before in history.
Yeah.
We're made to believe that a woman's body count doesn't matter at all, but data shows that it does, in fact, have an effect on divorce rates. Okay, guys? The number of women who had 10 plus sexual partners before marriage nearly doubled in the last 30 years. In the 1970s, 43% of women had one premarital sex partner before they walked down the aisle. But the sexual revolution that took place in that decade changed things forever. In the 1990s, 26% of women had one premarital sex partner, and that number dropped to 22% in the 2010s. There's no data yet for 2020 and beyond, but we can only assume that this number continues to shrink. But the data becomes even more shocking when you look at how many women have had multiple sex partners before marriage.
Sheesh.
In the 1970s, only 6% of women had 4 to 5 premarital sex partners.
In the 70s, before they got Planned Parenthood, went in the classroom and started funding initiatives, and they started teaching sex education. There used to not be sex education in school, and the way that they got it into the classroom in the 70s was by saying, you know, it's better to teach them, which is what you're saying, because then they'll be more responsible. It actually, within one decade, it flipped. The majority of high schoolers were graduating with their virginity before there was sex education, and then when they put sex education in the classroom, the majority of them within 10 years were not graduating with their virginity. So it actually sexualized children.
Yeah. My understanding, but the reason why was because the first manifestations of sex education was abstinence only.
And it was working is what I'm saying to you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was working. So abstinence, it used to be, you know, considered, and I'm not at all trying to, I'm just telling you what the facts are here. Like when abstinence was the cultural simulation, when everyone said you should be abstinent, you should not have sex before marriage, that idea was permeated throughout culture. It was reflected in culture. There were no sex ads. There weren't people naked on the internet, and people lived their lives. It was considered a big thing.
And folks, you know, we need to bear that in mind. So just to recap, you've got Candace Owens on the Whatever podcast. The lady on the left is supposedly a sex therapist. She helps couples who are going through sexual difficulty by sleeping with the husband, or offering sexual services to men, you know, who are going through problems. And then as we move towards the left, you've got, once again, the lady in the orange, the young girl in the orange, basically looking rather demonic, who, is a full-on, sex worker who admits to having, you know, sometimes as much as 10 customers per night. And what Candice is doing here in this debate is in this discussion, I should say, is she's explaining how there was a period in time, just a few generations back, whereby no sex before marriage was the norm. And as I said in my previous commentary, you see, this current generation were told that, well, women were living in relationships where they were sexually repressed, they were stuck with husbands who couldn't fulfill them sexually, which I think is a load of rubbish. And I pointed out that the reason why I felt it was a load of rubbish, because, you see, the media doesn't cover the millions of relationships whereby there was no sex before marriage. Couples worked out what works for them, and they went on to have very, very successful marriages that went on for 30, 40, 50 years. See, we don't hear about those marriages. They don't make the news. The only thing that we hear, the only thing that makes the news, sensationalized in the news, in the media, are women who come forward to say, their relationships were really bad, sexual relationships were bad with their husbands. The truth of the matter was that many, many couples went on to live very fulfilling lives, having many, many children, becoming grandparents with their grandchildren, going on to look after them in their old age. This sustained families, this sort of structure for centuries. But as soon as they brought in sex education to, if you like, rewire women and men as well into believing that in actual fact, there's no way that you can have a relationship unless you test drive sex before. So can you see the 180? And, at the end of the day, if you're going to judge success by outcomes, you'd have to say we are failing with that narrative now. Anyway, let's move on.
To lose your virginity, you were actually considered someone that maybe a guy wouldn't want to marry because you lost your virginity. That was the cultural understanding, in the 50s and the 60s. And then in the 70s, you had this fourth wave of feminism that reared its ugly head and started associating sexual promiscuity to freedom, and things completely flipped. Again, I'm just giving you a historical analysis of what happened in the classroom.
Yeah, I'd
without
be interested.
Commentary.
Yeah,
Hold on.
It's okay if you. Sorry, I'll just finish.
Make
this.
it quick if you
Yeah,
can.
I'd be interested to see where exactly you're getting that from. If later you can tell me or whatever.
Thomas Sowell, Inside the Education System, and he has
Okay.
all of the sources listed in the back of the book.
What's interesting about that book by Thomas Sowell is how that also led to, in the 60s, young African American female teenagers, certainly in the poorer parts of, say, for example, Chicago, developing this mindset of, again, sex before marriage. They're having kids, and then you had these social reforms that Thomas Sowell was really against, which saw the state paying for housing and what have you, social housing. And Thomas Sowell was he was a considerable critic of that policy because he believed that it incentivized the young black women to have sex without any consideration for, childbirth, for the sole purpose of being able to get money from the government and also get housing. And dare I say, that idea then proliferated to places like the UK, where, come the 90s, 80s and 90s, there was this wave of teenage pregnancy. And again, sex before marriage, policies then to encourage this, enabled, free social housing, which, if you fast forward to today, what happened via 2020 and OnlyFans, it's leading us down a road of just pure debauchery. I hope I've made that clear. It's an issue that really puts a lump in my throat. But as I say, Candice Owens, she does a better job of articulating it than myself. So we'll just finish off with this clip, and then I'll give you my closing remarks.
At least in modern day, do you think that any of that has flipped or no?
No, I think we've become, there was, to use a term, I was actually talking about this yesterday on a podcast. I thought it was pretty brilliant. Paul Joseph Watson, I love his YouTube stuff. And he started talking about hoflation, which is
that's a thing.
Actually hilarious, which is saying that men used to have to do a lot less and get a very high value woman. He's like, so think about your grandparents and your grandmother. She was a high value woman. She raised the kids. She was conservative. She was beautiful, all of these things. And now we live in this moment where everyone's kind of a hoe, and you have to work harder to get a woman that doesn't have any self-respect or any value.
That is the most profound statement I've heard in a long time. And I'm glad it came from Candice Owens. As I say, making the argument that at the end of the day, what it has led to is, as she calls it, hoflation. Admittedly, she got that expression from Paul Joseph Watson. So just to recap, what's happened is it's created a woman who is so much more lower value, because the average man today will be hard pushed to find a woman who's a virgin, like their great grandmother or grandmothers were. A woman who hasn't got a high body count, simply because women now believe that, well, you have got to sleep with someone before you even consider being in a relationship with them, before, to ensure that the sex is good. I mean, it's crazy. A woman who may decide that, well, hang on, because she's earning lots of money from OnlyFans, that you have to be a cuck, essentially. Even the top tier guys now are likely to find themselves with a woman, certainly in the West, that is definitely not anything near traditional, nowhere near it. And so going back to the original topic, which was the discussion between Octavio and Andrew Wilson, which was, is it really true that men are responsible for women's behavior? Well, I think the answer is pretty self-explanatory. And when considering all the points that have been mentioned here, it's also worth noticing that it's far too simplistic to blame it on women as well. Far too simplistic. As I say, there is a force that's leading humanity, both men and women, and is in control of every facet of our society. The only way around it, basically, is to look to yourself as individuals. Read the Bible, see what God says with regards to his expectations on your life, and then make the decisions as to, who you're going to pick as a life partner. Because I don't think it's feasible saying that you're going to be single. I've heard arguments that, well, it's not feasible to bring someone, to have children or whatever else. That's fair enough. But once again, is it feasible to be single?
Over 24% of Italy's population is over 65, and this number is only rising. We're not the first one to mention this. Italy's very own health minister is also worrying about this. She's quoted saying that Italy is a dying country. So what's the problem? What's killing Italy? It has to do with two words: fertility rates. This refers to the number of babies each woman has on average. The fertility rate in Italy is one of the lowest in the world, with a number of 1.24 births per woman. To maintain a stable population, you need a fertility rate of about 2.1. Because of this fact, Italy's number of 1.24 is making its population very unstable. So unstable, in fact, that a population collapse is not only coming, it's inevitable. For years now, Italy has had fewer births than deaths, slowly chipping away at its total population number. In 2022, the country recorded a record low number of births. It had less than 400,000 newborns, with a total population of about 59 million people. Imagine that. For years now, the country's population has been falling by around 200,000 every year. This huge population decline began back in 2015, and the trend is only worsening. Keep in mind that a population decline is inevitable when birth rates stay low. Every new generation could just become smaller and smaller, to the point of no return. Elon Musk is worried about this possibility, saying that Italy will have no people if these trends continue. This is no exaggeration, as it is happening in some places already. Around 6,000 rural villages in the country have been abandoned, and 15,000 could soon follow. The rapidly aging population is the main cause of this, as once thriving villages have become empty ghost towns. And this isn't the only effect of the aging population, or even the biggest one. Demographics are one of the most important statistics for a country, because they play a role in almost every system in society. The economy, politics, and the welfare system are all closely intertwined with demographics.
Once again, this is Jimothy with the Conversational Bible Chats. I hope you've enjoyed this one. The forthcoming commentaries I'm going to be doing will be much shorter. I do realize this has gone on way too long, but from the comments I've received from previous episodes that I've put out, you guys seem to be enjoying it. Once again, please like and subscribe to the channel. Share as well. I'll try to do clips and shorts as well. But in the meantime, stay safe, and I look forward to reading your comments in the comment section. Take care. Goodbye.